Happy Sunday, all you Minties! This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, and join me today for an overview of Jack Kirby's The Fourth World Omnibus from DC Comics. So, stay tuned. And welcome back, everybody. Now, this is my first printing of Jack Kirby's Fourth World, but this is the corrected printing. What I wanted to do with today's overview was to showcase the artwork and talk a little bit about the story, because this book was just recently reprinted by DC. Of course, it's also available in absolute format, and there were 4 hardcovers, standard size, that made up the stories that are in here. But I did want to showcase what this book looked like. So here, of course, this cover of Orion vs. Darkseid by Jack Kirby, and you have Big Barda here. The spine with an image of Big Barda and Jack the King Kirby up there. Fourth World Omnibus by Jack Kirby. And then the back of the book. The book retailing for $150. This is the 2017 version. And of course, the new printing also being $150. So there's the image of Darkseid. What I did want to show while I had the spine here is the design of another Jack Kirby Omnibus. There's also the OMAC Omnibus, but for some reason I haven't gotten that yet. I guess I need to remedy that. But here it is, right next to the Kamandi Omnibus. Of course, Kamandi not containing as many issues as the Fourth World. And honestly, this is the reason why I went back and got this, and I'll explain while I'm showing the artwork. Kind of give you an idea of what is under the dust jacket is this image of Orion with Jack Kirby right there on the spine. Also, this little caption box here, written, drawn, and edited by Jack Kirby, inks by Vince Colletta. So let's get this open and talk about this specific era of comics, and of course the premise of some of the stories in here. Alright, let's get this big boy open, and when I mean big, this one's big. It's one of the biggest Omnis I have, at 1,536 pages. Fourth World Omnibus by Jack Kirby. Stories and artwork by Jack Kirby. Here are your inks and your letters, cover art, and Fourth World created by Jack Kirby. As well as all these people down here that he created, all those characters. On the left-hand side are more credits for the design of the book and the collected editions, and then here we have your table of contents, including the introduction by Mark Evanier and your foreword by Walter Simonson. And then they also tell you where to find each of the stories that are in here. So the story of In Search of a Dream takes place in the issue of The Forever People #1 that came out in 1971, and here you have the cover pencils and then the inks too. So this is a really handy table of contents because there are page numbers here. So this contains Jimmy Olsen 133 to 139, 141 to 148, The Forever People 1 through 11, Mr. Miracle 1 through 18, The New Gods 1 through 11. There was a New Gods reprint series. It collects 1 through 6, but mainly the covers and then the additional story. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then DC graphic novel #4, The Hunger Dogs. And then it also contains some pages from the Who's Who, the directory of the DC Universe. And here is more of the table of contents. It's a big book. So you have an introduction here by Mark Evanier, one of Jack Kirby's assistants. And honestly, it's a very heartfelt introduction, talking about how it was to work with him and how great Jack Kirby made you feel, no matter how inferior you thought you were to the man. And then here we have an introduction by Walter Simonson. Mark Evanier's introduction, it's 3 pages, and it also gives you a history lesson as to why Jack Kirby decided to come over to DC Comics. He doesn't get into the whole details and politics, but pretty much just a little bit of what happened. And here we have Superman's ex-pal, Jimmy Olsen. So this is where Jack Kirby kicked off this Fourth World story. It all starts building from here. So initially he wanted to come over to DC and tell the story of New Genesis, which is the death of the old gods, and there's going to be new gods. And that originally started as an idea when he was doing the backup stories from the Tales of Asgard. So originally it was supposed to be a Thor story. However, things happen, and like I mentioned, Mark Evanier goes into more detail about that he just was not happy at Marvel. There were new contracts made. He wasn't going to be making as much money. He wasn't going to get the credit that he rightly deserved. So he was unhappy and decided to take off for the distinguished competition when they offered him more money and more of a title. And in the end, also over there, it wasn't as glamorous as he thought it was going to be. So from 1970 to 1973, he created these stories that are in this particular omnibus. And one interesting thing about these stories in here that feature Superman is that while he did draw Superman in pencils, usually DC had an artist go back after him and redraw the face of Superman. So even though Jack Kirby draws the entire thing, the layouts, the bodies, somebody else would come in behind him and draw Superman. It's not the first time that's happened. We've seen that at Marvel too. Like some of the drawings that he did for Conan, somebody had to come in, like John Romita, and redraw Conan's face. Well, the same thing happened here, but it was inside of every panel. Of course, this Kirby doing some experimental art, like he always did. But yes, what you see here is not Jack Kirby's, and I'll look in the back here. I think they have a couple of pictures of what his Superman looked like. There are some spread pages here. Some of them are separated by the frames. However, in some cases, they're not. They're just spreads like this. Now, where was I? I was talking about a little bit about the history. Yes. The very first appearance here of Darkseid in Jimmy Olsen number 134. It's this little tiny panel right here. So through Jimmy Olsen, the first few issues, he started building this backup story about this fourth world. And this and those three other titles I mentioned are going to be interconnected by these backup stories, which will eventually be the whole fourth world event. And what an epic story it was. Man, that introduction really kind of put things into perspective. Jack Kirby was already thinking ahead of time. He wanted these comics to be kind of like the Lord of the Rings. He compared it to the Lord of the Rings. Like, he wanted people to own them in a nice prestige format because comics were changing back during this time in the late 60s, early 70s. People were collecting them. Kids weren't just throwing them away anymore. So he wanted a nicer format for people to keep them. It's almost like he was thinking about the absolute and omnibus format back then. And here we have the Forever People. And he had a contract where he had to draw 15 pages a week. So he was putting out 4 comics. That wasn't what he wanted to do. He wanted to focus all of that energy into this new story. But with the DC contract, they were telling him that he had to draw an existing comic. So that's where Jimmy Olsen kind of comes in. But he makes it work. Because through Jimmy Olsen, you kind of see the human's perspective, Superman's perspective on this gigantic war that's taken place. We have New Gods number 1. And this introduces us to, I love this page right here, which you've seen, it's been homaged before. And this introduces us to Light Ray, Orion, the High Father, Metron, and a bunch of the new gods that are hanging out in New Genesis. We also get to see Darkseid's place, the Apocalypse. So we're introduced to Darkseid and Desaad. And then here is the 4th title he worked on, Mr. Miracle. And Mr. Miracle at first was rumored not to be in this collection because he had just recently been published as a big, fat collection. I think it was a trade paperback or a hardcover. But they decided to put all 18 issues here. So here we meet Scott Free, and eventually, and we meet him and Oberon. But I was going to say, and eventually, I think in issue 4 is where she first appears. We also meet Big Barda. So things are changing. The stories are all coming together. Here are all the new gods like Big Bear and Viking and Beautiful Dreamer. And we're getting to know more and more about these characters and how interconnected they are with this giant war that's taken place. So it feels like through these 4 different comics, we're getting one big epic story. And that's exactly what he wanted to do. Now, the way that this is collected in here is collected in publishing order. So you don't get all of Jimmy Olsen at the very beginning. You don't get all 18 issues of Mr. Miracle at one time. You get them as they were originally released in publishing order. So 4 times, I think at one time they were bi-monthly. So after Mr. Miracle, you get the Forever People number 3. Now, this is my copy from 2017. The new copy will be identical. Maybe the paper quality and the binding will be different, so I'm not going to go over that. But the one thing I did want to say is the original printing. Hey, there's a character right here that was introduced through the earlier pages, and then eventually, I think it was editorial that stepped in and said, hey, that guy seems to be pretty popular. Let's add him to the New Gods story. And Kirby, of course, being Jack the King Kirby, he was like, yeah, I'll make it work. Sure. And what was I saying? Oh, yes, the original printing, the first printing of this in 2017 had an error. And I think, look at that. Man, that's awesome. All the Kirby crackle in the back. And there's this whole thing between Vince Colletta and how much he corrected or how much he erased. But you can find out about that stuff on your own. Let's just focus on the book here. What I was going to say, I think it was in page 943. It was a Jimmy Olsen story. There was an error that it reprinted an earlier page instead of a splash page. Yeah, right here. So in this issue of Jimmy Olsen, there was a splash page. Yeah, so this is the correct page that you'll be seeing. So on page 943, the first printing had another page from a previous chapter. There was a big uproar about it, and DC decided to stop printing on that first printing and reprint the book with the corrected page. And I know one page is not a big deal to a lot of people, but it does bother some. Most, I guess. Whenever you're paying for a book that's $150, you want perfection. So, I get it. Beautiful spread pages. So, yes, you're introduced to the Furies in here, Granny Goodness, all these characters that you probably know were first introduced throughout this book right here. So, let's fast forward a little bit, because sadly, Jack Kirby didn't get to finish this gigantic epic he was going to tell. Again, because of things happening between the publisher and the creator, he went back to Marvel. And went back to Marvel to tell the story of these group of people known as the Eternals. So you may see some things that he was probably going to do in those issues of the Eternals at Marvel. And what they did do, though, let's see if I can find it, right here. So these were reprints of the New Gods from, I think this is 1980, mid-80s is when this came out, because this came out before Hunger Gods, I think, to get people ready. So they added some pages here to kind of wrap up those stories. It's not the way that Jack Kirby intended it to end, but now we have Jack Kirby, and then you have inks in here by D. Bruce Berry, and then the colorist is Anthony Tollin. So it looks like more modern colors than he was using, or they were using back here in the early 70s. But it does kind of wrap up some of the loose ends that were through the pages of the New Gods. And then, about a year later, we got Hunger Dogs. This was a DC graphic novel, so it was in the graphic novel line. So the colors look a little bit different, the inks are definitely different, but this is still Jack Kirby telling the story of his characters, of the New Gods that he introduced earlier in the 70s. So that is included in here. And this also serves as a closure, but also leaving things open for future writers to come in and take over the book, which was, I know, not his intent, because he wanted to tell this epic and finish it. And then towards the back, we get the Mother Box files. So we get all the characters here, where they first appeared. This is from the Who's Who. So if you just want to come back here and get to know some of these characters before reading the stories, even though everything you need is really here, you're more than welcome to come back here. We even have Steppenwolf, because he was a big part of the Justice League by Scott Snyder, even though he looks a lot different in the comic book. And speaking of comic book, this is one of those books that I bought last year. I didn't buy it when it came out because I have this stupid idea in my head. Actually, I just missed somebody here. Funky Flashman, who's supposed to, well, he's supposed to look like somebody that Jack Kirby knew in his life, that he worked with really close, and just they weren't the best of friends during this time. But anyway, that's another story. What I was going to say is that, let's go back and show some artwork while I talk about this. Yeah, I was hesitant to read this because, I've always stated on the channel that my DC be, whoa, hey now, why did I wait so long to read that? Where the hell was I? Oh, yes, I was hesitant to read this because I've always stated this mentality of my DC began post-Crisis on Infinite Earths. So I tried going back and reading Golden Age. I tried going back and reading Silver Age. Different books, too. Not just Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, but just different titles. And just, it never really clicked with me. That's why I got rid of my Golden Age books. Even Bronze Age books. The beginning of the Bronze Age stuff. Although that Batman Brave and the Bold Volume 3 is pretty damn solid. But for some reason, I really like Kamandi. And I got the Omnibus when it came out. I think during my haul video, I explained how I got it for like $30 because I made Amazon honor this error that they had on their website for a couple of weeks. But anyway, I got that because I always liked the character of Kamandi. I don't know why, and I love that Omnibus. So after I was done with that, I was like, I think I'm ready to try out some Fourth World. A lot of my viewers, a lot of you wonderful folks were like, dude, you need to try it. It's a lot different than what was going on at the time. So, I'm not gonna lie, it was a struggle at first. Those first few issues of Jimmy Olsen, they were okay. But it wasn't until I got into the Forever People, even Mr. Miracle, the earlier stuff was just okay. But the New Gods and the Forever People, that's what got me hooked. They took me a long time to finish this because I was reading this in between some of the things that I'm reading for videos. So this was more of a fun read, but I knew I would eventually be making this video as soon as DC announced the reprint was coming, and it just came out this week. I was like, I gotta finish. So I finished the last stories last night, and it took me about a year to wrap up this, and I'm glad I did because it was a lot of fun. Oh my god, this man's worked for 3 years, all put in here. There's a lot of Jack Kirby in here. Puts so much of himself into his work. It's amazing to own it all in one collection. 1,536 pages. That's crazy. But yeah, overall, I ended up enjoying it. I'm surprised it took me this long. I'm in my 40s now to go back and read the original New Gods. I had read the New Gods in the 80s and then the run in the 90s and even some of the John Byrne stuff, but never the original stuff. I think I was just hesitant because this time was symbolized by all these goofy kind of comics that were going around. Even Jimmy Olsen back then was silly comic up until Jack Kirby took it over and reintroduced some of the characters that he did. Now, in the introduction, it will break your heart with some of the ideas that Jack Kirby wanted to do with this. Eventually, like Mr. Miracle was going to be drawn by Steve Ditko. He wanted to get John Romita to draw the Forever People and things like that. But that was never to be. And such is life, right? All the plans we have. But let's look at some more extras because I did want to show, past the Mother Box files, are these pinups here. The Forever People, Light Ray, Infinity Man, the man himself, Calabac the Cruel, and here we go. So, it's not a good example, but there's the Superman Jack Kirby face. There we go. So this is from Jimmy Olsen number 145. And that's the way that he drew Superman, right? This is Jack Kirby's pencils. So I'm flipping through here. I keep coming back to Big Barda. Why the hell did it take me so long to read this book? Alright, found the page. So this is Jack Kirby's Superman face. And then when another artist came in to redraw it. Sometimes it was the inker. Sometimes they actually got somebody to come in and redraw Superman. I don't know. As an artist, as the creator of this entire story, I don't know how I would feel about that. I mean, he was a professional, so I assume he was okay with that. Maybe it hurt later on, but that's just really strange that Superman, because he had this look at DC, had to be redrawn by another artist. But that's it. That's my overview of this big, hefty book. That, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this book, don't forget to check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online home for brand new graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They pride themselves on packaging your books so they arrive safely in an excellent condition, as well as prompt and helpful service. Check out the bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. CGN is excited to announce that they are now taking pre-orders. They're making it easier for you to ensure that you don't miss out on the hottest releases. CGN is currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, let them know that you were referred by Near Mint Condition at the checkout, checkout, and you'll receive a credit for free shipping on your next order. This promotion is valid for U.S. customers only. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount and quality shipping and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content and page count of this copy of the Fourth World Omnibus. Let me know in the comments down below if you've ever read it, if you have never read it, if you have the Absolute editions, if you're good with the Omnibus editions or the original Omnibus editions, or if you are picking up the newly reprinted Omnibus. I would love to know all those answers in the comments down below. If you have any more questions, by all means, please leave them in the comments below. This was the Uncanny Omar. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to check out our Patreon and our Spreadshop. Amazing ways to support the channel. And more importantly, everyone, stay healthy, stay safe, and much love.